The screams you hear after dark in the Tanana River corridor are not animals. I've been a ranger in this district for 11 years, and I can tell you that with the same confidence I'd tell you water runs downhill. They are not foxes in heat. They are not lynx. They are not the acoustic tricks that wind plays on spruce valleys at temperature inversion. I've heard all of those things, catalogued them, and filed them away in the part of my brain that deals with the explainable world. The screams are something else. But this isn't a story about the screams. Not really. This is a story about what I did to Elias Cortland during his first week on the job, and whether I had the right. I need you to understand the geography first, because without it, nothing I'm about to describe will land correctly. The Tanana district covers roughly 4,000 square miles of interior Alaska, south of Fairbanks, running from the foothills of the Alaska Range up through boreal forest and muskeg flats that stretch to the horizon in every direction. We have 6 staffed ranger stations. During the summer, when the sun barely sets, we run a crew of 14, 8 permanent, 6 seasonal. Come September, when the light starts bleeding away at 40 minutes per week, the seasonal staff rotate out and we drop to 8. By November, it's effectively 5 by deep winter. December through February, when we're getting 3.5 hours of functional daylight and temperatures sit at -30 for weeks at a stretch, it's 3. 3 rangers covering 4,000 square miles of wilderness. That's the reality of the job. That's not some administrative failure or budget scandal. That's just what Alaska is. I run the winter crew, have for 7 years. The other 2 rotate. My current winter partner is Dale Husko, who's been in the district almost as long as I have, and who I trust the way you trust the floor under your feet, not because I've tested it, but because it hasn't ever given way. The 3rd spot is the problem. The 3rd spot is always the problem, because the 3rd spot goes to whoever we can get to stay through an Alaskan interior winter in the most remote staffed station in the district. And the type of person willing to do that is either exactly the kind of ranger you want or exactly the kind you don't, with very little middle ground. Elias Cortland arrived on September 14. He was 26. He had 2 seasons under his belt, 1 in the Cascades, 1 in the Boundary Waters, and the kind of quiet, self-sufficient temperament that looks perfect on paper for a winter backcountry posting. He'd requested it specifically. He said he wanted the experience. He said he wanted to understand what real isolation felt like before he decided whether to make the NPS his career. I liked him immediately. That's important to say up front, because everything that came later would be easier to justify if I could pretend I didn't. The first 2 weeks were orientation, standard procedure. I took Elias on day patrols to each of the 6 stations, showed him the equipment caches, walked him through the radio protocols, let him drive the snow machine on the packed trails before the serious snow came in. Dale handled the survival refreshers, cold injury recognition, emergency shelter construction, the 13-point checklist for solo overnight field stays. We covered the wildlife protocols, moose rut behavior in September, the last grizzlies fattening before den-up in October, wolf pack territory boundaries as we understood them that year. We covered the communication schedule, check-in with District HQ in Fairbanks every 12 hours, satellite phone as backup, EPIAB as last resort. We did not cover the screams. This was not an accidental omission. It was policy, not written policy. We don't have a manual entry for it. And if you called Fairbanks and asked, they'd tell you they have no idea what you're talking about. It's institutional knowledge that exists only in the heads of the rangers who've wintered here. And it is passed down the way that every critical piece of unwritten knowledge in every dangerous profession is passed down, through direct conversation between people who've earned the right to hear it. At the moment when the senior person judges, the junior person is ready. The judgment of that moment is everything. Get it wrong early, and the new ranger panics, quits, or, worse, becomes so fixated on the screams that they make stupid decisions trying to investigate. Get it wrong, late, and they hear the screams, unprepared, alone, in the dark, and the panic is worse. I had planned to tell Elias during the 3rd week. That was my standard timeline. 2 weeks to build rapport and demonstrate competence in every other area. Then, a careful conversation, framed not as a ghost story, but as a field hazard, like hypothermia, like overflow ice, like the way a whiteout can turn a person around inside 20 feet. A thing that exists, that has consistent properties, that can be managed with the right information. Dale agreed with the timeline. Dale always defers to me on this. But the screams came early that year. It was September 21st. The sun was setting around 8. The 3 of us were at Ridgeline Station, the most central of our 6 posts. A 20 by 20 log cabin with a propane heater, a radio set, and a view of the Tanana River Valley that on a clear day extends 40 miles in 3 directions. We were doing a routine overnight as part of Elias's orientation. I'd cooked moose chili. Dale was doing a battery inventory. Elias was sitting by the window, writing in a field journal he kept, the kind with a leather cover and unlined pages. The screams started at 8:47 p.m. I know the time because I looked at my watch the instant I heard the first one, out of a habit I developed years ago and have never been able to break. It came from the northeast, maybe a mile out, maybe 2. Distance is unreliable with these things, which I'll explain. It was a single, sustained sound, lasting approximately 7 seconds. It rose in pitch across the first 3 seconds, held at the peak for 2, and descended across the final 2. The peak was high, not falsetto high, not the thin screech of a fox, but the full-throated upper register of something with large lungs and a wide vocal apparatus. It sounded, as it always sounds, like a human woman screaming in genuine terror. Not pain, terror. There's a difference that you learn to hear when you've worked search and rescue long enough. Pain screams are ragged and involuntary, shredded by the body's inability to control the sound. Terror screams are clean. The lungs are working correctly. The vocal cords are taut. The body is physically fine. It is the mind that is breaking. That's what these sound like, every time. Elias's pen stopped. I watched his hand freeze over the journal, and I watched his eyes go to the window, and I watched the transformation that I have now seen in 9 different people across 7 years. The face of a person who has heard something that their brain is already trying to reclassify as something it wasn't. Fox, Dale said, without looking up from his batteries. Not a question. A label offered freely so that Elias's brain would have somewhere to put the sound. That was not a fox, Elias said. The second scream came 11 seconds after the first. Same direction, same duration, same pitch profile, identical. Not similar, identical in the way that a recorded playback is identical. No living animal produces 2 consecutive vocalizations with 0 variation. Breathing alone introduces micro differences. Emotional state introduces drift. The second scream was a precise copy of the first, and that precision is the thing that Dale's Fox label was meant to cover, because it is the thing that, once noticed, cannot be unnaughty. Red fox in rut, Dale said again, this time looking at Elias, and his voice carried the tone that I'd heard him use with disoriented hikers. Calm, authoritative, not quite patronizing, but firmly in control of the interpretation. They sound incredibly human. Everybody gets spooked the first time. Elias looked at me, not at Dale. At me, and I understood immediately what he was doing. Because Elias was smart in the specific way that makes a person dangerous in this context. He was reading the room. He could see that Dale's explanation was too fast. He could see that my hands had moved to my lap, below the table, where he couldn't see whether they were steady. He could see that neither of us had gone to the window. It sounded like a woman. Elias said, "They all do." I said, "It's a fox." The third scream came, the fourth, the fifth, each separated by exactly 11 seconds, each identical. They continued for 4 minutes and 18 seconds, 23 screams total, and then stopped. The silence afterward had a physical quality, a pressurized stillness, like the air inside a sealed room. Elias returned to his journal. He didn't write anything. He sat with his pen over the page and his eyes on the window, and he didn't say another word about it that night. And I could feel, with the certainty of someone who has watched this happen over and over, the exact shape of the thought forming in his head. They're lying to me. He was right. We were. I need to explain why. There are things in the Tanana corridor that the three of us, the winter crew, manage in the same way that a rancher manages a river that floods every spring. You don't stop the flood. You don't drain the river. You build your fences in the right places. You move your animals to high ground before the water comes. And you accept that the river is a feature of the landscape that predates you and will outlast you, and is not interested in your opinions about where it should flow. The screams are river. They've been documented in this district, in personal journals and unofficial margin notes since at least 1978. The earliest reference I found is a handwritten note in a maintenance log from the old Gerstel River station, written by a seasonal named Paul Kedzie. Heard the woman again. Third night running. Same time, same direction. Counted 15. Dave says, "Don't go out." Dave, I later determined, was Dave Okpeluk, a Koyukon Athabaskan from Tanana who ranged this district for 22 years, and who, when I tracked down his nephew and asked about it, had reportedly described the screams as old. Not old as in a long-running phenomenon, but old as in the thing making them is old, as in it has been here longer than the word for it. The screams follow rules, not every time perfectly, but with enough consistency that I've mapped the pattern across 7 winters, and the pattern holds. They begin after sunset. Always after full dark, not civil twilight, not nautical twilight, but astronomical dark, when the sun is more than 18 degrees below the horizon. They come from the northeast quadrant of whatever station the listener is occupying. Always northeast. I've tested this from all 6 stations, and the bearing is always between 30 and 60 degrees true north, regardless of the station's position in the district, which means the screams are not coming from a fixed point in the landscape. They orient to the listener. They occur in sequences of 15 to 30, separated by intervals of 9 to 14 seconds, with the interval consistent within a given sequences, but variable between sequences. The individual scream duration is 6 to 8 seconds. The pitch profile, the rise, sustain, and fall, does not vary. They do not occur every night. across my 7 winters of data. The average is 11 nights per month from October through March, dropping to 3 or 4 in April, before ceasing entirely by mid-May, which roughly tracks the loss and return of extended daylight. The distribution is not random. There are clusters, 4 to 6 consecutive nights of screams, followed by a week of silence, and the clusters correlate, loosely but noticeably, with geomagnetic activity. I am not a physicist, and I don't know what to do with that correlation, except note it. They do not approach. In 11 years, the apparent distance of the screams from my position has never decreased during a sequence. They maintain range or recede slightly. I have GPS tagged my position during hundreds of sequences, and the screams have never come closer than approximately 800 meters by my best estimate. They do not respond to noise. I've played engine sounds, shouted, fired weapons, used air horns. No change in pattern, no acknowledgement. Whatever is producing them either doesn't hear me or doesn't care. They are not recorded on audio equipment. This is the one that took me the longest to confirm, and the one that I still can't look at directly without feeling something twist in my chest. I have deployed professional-grade field recording equipment, parabolic microphones, omnidirectional arrays, the same setups used by the wildlife acoustics teams who pass through every summer. The screams are audible to the naked ear. They are not present on the recordings. Not faintly, not as distortion, not at all. The recordings capture ambient sound, wind, distant water, the occasional animal. But during the intervals where I am hearing the screams, the recordings show nothing. I had a wildlife acoustics PhD from University of Alaska Fairbanks review 3 of my recordings without telling her what to listen for. She said, the acoustic environment appeared normal. She noted one anomaly. During the intervals I'd flagged, the ambient sound profile showed a slight reduction in insect and small mammal activity, as if the animals were quieter than baseline, as if they were listening too. So that's what the screams are. A consistent, patterned, non-recordable acoustic phenomenon that has persisted in this district for at least 47 years, that orients to the listener's position, that follows predictable behavioral rules, and that sounds exactly like a woman being terrorized. And that's what we don't tell the new seasonal ranger until we judge they're ready. You might think the obvious question is what is producing the screams. It's not. The obvious question, the one that actually matters for the work, is what happens when someone responds to them. I told you the screams don't approach. That's true. They maintain distance or recede. But there is a reciprocal behavior. If a listener moves toward the screams move away. Same distance, same bearing. You cannot close the gap. I've tried this on foot, on snow machine, even once with a bush plane flying the bearing at low altitude, in cooperation with a pilot friend who owed me a favor and didn't ask enough questions. The sound stays ahead. It retreats at exactly the rate you advance. But, and this is the critical behavioral detail, it retreats along a path, not randomly. It moves northeast, always northeast. Away from the stations, away from the roads, away from the river corridors, and into the deepest, most remote, most featureless boreal wilderness in the district, the country north of the Granite Range, where there are no trails, no structures, no GPS waypoints of any kind, and where in winter the snow cover is deep enough and the terrain flat enough that a person on foot could walk for days without encountering a single landmark by which to navigate back. The screams lead you in. I learned this the experiential way, my second winter, before Dale, before I was the senior ranger, when I was the Elias in the room, and the then senior, a woman named Margit Talvela, who had wintered here since 2006, was the one deciding when to tell me the truth. Margit told me too late. I heard the screams alone from Gerstel Station on a night in November when Margit was at Ridgeline and the third ranger had already quit and gone back to Juneau. I heard the screams and I didn't think Fox. I thought someone is in trouble. I put on my parka, took a headlamp and a rifle and a handheld radio, and I went out. I followed the screams. I snowshoed northeast across the flats at a pace that had me sweating inside my layers within 10 minutes, and the screams stayed ahead, always the same distance, always the same direction. And I kept going because the sound was so convincingly, so viscerally human that stopping felt like cowardice, like leaving someone to die. I walked for 2 hours. When I stopped, not because I decided to, but because my left snowshoe binding broke and I went knee-deep into overflow, and the shock of water hitting my skin through the gaiter forced me to think about something other than the sound. I was 8 miles from the station, 8 miles northeast, in the dark, in -20, with a broken snowshoe and a wet leg, and the screams were still exactly the same distance ahead of me. They hadn't gotten louder, they hadn't gotten softer. They were precisely as close and precisely as far as they'd been when I stepped off the porch. I turned around. The screams stopped, not tapered off. Stopped between one breath and the next, as if someone had hit a switch. It took me 5 hours to get back. I lost 2 toes on my left foot to frostbite. The small toe and the one next to it. They're gone now. Clean amputation at the hospital in Fairbanks. I told the doctor I'd broken through overflow on a night patrol, which was true. I just didn't explain what I'd been patrolling toward. Margit told me the rest the next day, not gently, not with any particular sympathy. She told me the way you'd tell someone that the stove is hot after they've already touched it. Now you know. Now here's everything else. What Margit told me is that she knew of 6 people who had followed the screams and not come back. Not 6 in her tenure. 6 that she was aware of across the district's history. Pieced together from the same kind of marginal documentation I later continued assembling. Journal entries, incident logs with missing details, missing person reports filed with the troopers that never resolved, and, most damningly, a quiet pattern in the NPS personnel records of winter seasonal rangers in this district who simply stopped reporting for duty and were listed as voluntary separations. No exit interviews, no forwarding addresses, just gone. The oldest case Margit could trace was 1981. A seasonal named Robert Fenn, who was stationed at the easternmost post, what we now call Cache Station. He missed 2 consecutive radio check-ins on a night in January. His partner, stationed 20 miles west, snow-machined in the next morning and found Cache Station empty. Fenn's pack was on his bunk. His parka was on the hook by the door. His boots were by the stove, still warm. He had left the station without his coat, without his boots, in January, at night, in interior Alaska. They found his tracks in the snow, barefoot, heading northeast. The tracks were steady and evenly spaced. No running, no stumbling, no signs of confusion or flight. Just a man walking calmly into the wilderness without shoes. The tracks continued for approximately 1 mile before a windstorm filled them in, and Robert Fenn was never found. The official report listed the cause as probable hypothermia, secondary to psychological disturbance. The weather that night was -36, Margit told me about 4 others with similar profiles. Always winter, always from remote stations, always northeast. She told me about her own experience. She'd followed the screams her first winter too, before the senior ranger at the time managed to raise her on the radio and talk her back. She made it 3 miles out. She was lucky. She said the hardest part wasn't the cold or the dark, but the feeling during the walk itself. The profound physical certainty that someone needed her, that she was the only person who could help, that stopping was the same as murder. I know that feeling. I felt it too, and I'm telling you about it because of what it means for Elias. What Margit taught me, what she called the only tool we have, is the protocol. It's not complicated. It has 3 components. First, the briefing. You tell the new Winter Ranger about the screams before they hear them. You explain the rules, you make it clinical, factual, boring if you can manage it. You strip the mystery out. You reduce it to a field hazard with known parameters and known management strategies, and you repeat the management strategies until they stick. Do not go outside during a sequence. Do not attempt to locate the source. Do not follow. If you hear the screams while in the field, stop, establish your position by GPS, and proceed directly to the nearest station by the most direct route. Do not deviate from the route. Do not attend to the sound. Second, the buddy system. No Winter Ranger operates solo after dark. Period. No exceptions. This means the 3rd Ranger is essential, not for the labor, but for the accountability. 2 people can keep each other inside. 1 person is a pair of boots away from walking into the dark. Third, and this is the part I've never been comfortable with, the lie. If a Winter Ranger cannot be convinced to stay by the briefing alone, you default to the Fox explanation. You hold firm. You do not escalate to the full truth, because the full truth, that something is out there that sounds like a person dying and wants you to come find it, does not make people cautious. It makes them either terrified, which leads to quitting, which leaves you short-handed, or fascinated, which leads to exactly the behavior the protocol exists to prevent. The lie is the load-bearing wall of the system. I have always hated it, and I have used it every single year. This is the moral question I actually live with, not whether the screams are supernatural or natural, not whether the thing making them is intelligent or mechanical or geological or something outside every category I have. Those questions are interesting. And on long winter nights, with the propane heater ticking and the dark pressing against the windows, I think about them. But they're not the question that keeps me awake. The question that keeps me awake is, do I have the right to decide who gets the truth? Because the protocol is not just about managing the screams. It's about managing people. It's about me. One person with no special authority beyond seniority, making a judgment call about another adult's capacity to handle information that directly affects their safety. It's about looking at someone like Elias Cortland and deciding, based on my read of his temperament, when and how much to tell him. And if I get that read wrong, if I misjudge his stability or his curiosity or the particular flavor of his stubbornness, the consequence isn't a bad performance review. The consequence is that he walks barefoot into the snow. Or, alternatively, the consequence is that I tell him everything too soon, and he bolts. He goes back to Washington State, or Minnesota, or wherever his life is waiting for him. And now, Dale and I are running the winter crew with 2 people instead of 3, which means one of us is alone after dark on the nights the other is in the field, which means one of us is a pair of boots away from walking into the dark. The math is ugly. It's human resource calculus performed on a person's life, and I do it every September. and I have never once felt clean about it. I'm telling you all of this before I tell you what happened with Elias, because I need you to understand that what I did to him was not careless. It was not sadistic. It was the same thing I'd done with every winter ranger for 7 years, executed on the same timeline and with the same intentions. And it had worked every time before. Every time before. The morning after the first screams, Elias was quiet at breakfast. He ate his oatmeal and drank his coffee, and looked out the window at the valley, which was bright with the low September sun. The birch trees just starting to turn, the whole landscape performing its annual trick of being so beautiful, you could almost forget what it does to you in the dark. I want to go back to that clearing today, he said. The one northeast of here, about a mile out, where the old survey marker is. Dale and I looked at each other. The old survey marker is a brass cap on a concrete post, set in 1964 by the USGS, in a clearing that happens to be almost exactly along the bearing from which the screams had come the night before. Why? I said. Tracks, Elias said. I want to see if there are fox tracks in the area. If a red fox is denning out that way, we should note it. It's part of the wildlife survey, right? This was, technically, correct. We do maintain a wildlife survey. Fox dens are noted. Elias was using the logic we'd given him, fox, and turning it into a reason to investigate. This is exactly the kind of smart that I was afraid of. I'll go with you, I said. We went. It was a clear day, 32 degrees, the ground soft but not yet snow-covered. We walked the mile to the survey marker in 20 minutes. The clearing was maybe 100 feet across, surrounded by black spruce, carpeted in lichen and low blueberry bushes. There were no fox tracks. There were no tracks of any kind. What there was, which I had not expected, and which Elias found within 5 minutes of arriving, because he was the kind of person who looked at the ground while walking, was a boot print. A single boot print in a patch of soft mud near the survey marker. Left foot. Standard Vibram sole pattern, consistent with an NPS issue hiking boot. Size 10 or 11. Fresh. The edges were sharp, the tread pattern distinct, no weathering, no debris accumulation. Someone's been out here recently, Elias said. I looked at the print. I looked at the direction it was pointing, northeast. I looked at the surrounding ground and saw no other prints. Not a trail leading to this spot, not a trail leading away. A single boot print, facing northeast, as if someone had been set down from the air, taken one step, and vanished. Probably one of the summer seasonals on a day hike, I said. This clearing is on the survey route. The tread pattern is fresh, Elias said. This is days old, not months. Mud preserves well this time of year. He looked at me. That same look from the night before. The room-reading look. The look of a person adding up small inconsistencies and arriving at a total that doesn't match what he's being told. He didn't push it. He noted the boot print's GPS coordinates in his field journal, sketched the tread pattern, and we walked back to Ridgeline Station. He asked no more questions that day, but I could feel the ledger building. Over the next week, the screams came 3 more nights. Each time, Dale or I deployed the fox explanation. Each time, Elias accepted it verbally and rejected it visibly. A slight tightening around his eyes, a fractional pause before he nodded, the body language of a person practicing patience. On September 29th, I found him in the station's storage room, going through the old logbooks. We keep them in a footlocker under the radio bench. Decades of daily logs, handwritten, going back to the early 70s. They're supposed to be archived at the district office in Fairbanks, but the transfer has never happened. Because the rangers who winter here understand that these logs contain information that should not be centralized, and each generation of winter rangers quietly fails to ship the footlocker south. Elias had 3 of the older logs open on the floor. He was reading by headlamp, even though it was midday and the windows were adequate. I think he'd been in there since before sunrise. These are routine maintenance records, I said. Anything specific you're looking for? Paul Kedzie, he said. Who was Paul Kedzie? The hair on my arms stood up. I don't say that lightly. I mean the physical response, the piloerection, the body's dumb animal alarm system firing before the conscious mind has fully processed the threat. Paul Kedzie was the name I told you about earlier, the earliest Scream reference. Heard the woman again. Seasonal ranger, late 70s, I said. Before my time. Why? Elias turned the logbook toward me. He'd marked a page with a torn piece of paper towel. The entry was from November 1978, in Kedzie's handwriting. Small, neat, the penmanship of someone who'd been taught cursive properly. Heard the woman again. 3rd night running. Same time, same direction. Counted 15. Dave says, don't go out. Dave says, it is a fox. I do not believe Dave. I am sorry to write that, but it is not a fox. I have lived with foxes. A fox does not repeat itself exactly. A fox does not stop when you start walking away. Tonight I stood on the porch and timed it, and the interval was 11 seconds, and the pitch did not vary by a quarter tone across 9 repetitions. Nothing alive does that. Dave is afraid, and I think he is afraid not of the sound, but of what I will do if I know the truth about the sound. Elias let me read the whole entry. Then he said, very quietly, he's describing the same thing we've been hearing. He's describing a fox, I said. A man in 1978 who'd been alone too long, hearing foxes and overthinking it. You told me these logs were routine maintenance records. They are. Rangers write personal observations in the margins sometimes. It doesn't mean. There are 6 more entries from Kedzie, Elias said. Over 3 weeks. The last one says he's going to go out and find the source. Then there are no more entries from Kedzie. The next handwriting is someone named Dave Okpeluk, and Dave's first entry starts with the words, Paul left on the 12th. That's it. Paul left. No mention of where, no mention of why, no transfer note. He just left. People leave winter postings. It's not unusual. In the middle of November, without closing out his log. I didn't answer. Elias closed the logbook. He put it back in the footlocker. He stood up, and he looked at me, and the expression on his face was not accusatory and not frightened. It was sad, the way you look at someone you've been trusting who has not been trusting you back. I don't need you to tell me right now, he said, but I need you to know that I know you're not telling me something. And I need you to know that I'm going to stay anyway, because I took this posting, and I plan to see it through. But I will figure out what it is, Karen, with you or without you. He went back to his bunk and began writing in his field journal. And I stood in the storage room with my heart going like a fist on a door, and the absolute knowledge that my timeline was blown, that I'd lost control of the information flow, that the careful, clinical, boring briefing I'd been planning for the 3rd week was now impossible because Elias didn't need my briefing. He was building his own from primary sources, and his version wouldn't come with the management strategies attached. I found Dale at the woodpile behind the station. It was sleeting lightly, the temperatures dropping as the last of September's warmth drained from the landscape. I told him what Elias had found. Dale stopped splitting and leaned on the axe and looked at the sky for a long time. "Tell him," Dale said. "He's not ready. He's already past the point where that matters. He's at the edge of the information anyway. Let him have it from us, with the protocol attached, or he gets it from the logbooks without the protocol, and then we have a problem." Dale was right. Dale is almost always right about the timing of things, which is why I rely on him, and why his judgment in what happened later matters so much to this account. That evening, after dinner, after the dishes, I sat Elias down at the table in Ridgeline Station, and I told him everything. The rules, the pattern, the recordings that capture nothing, the bearing that always points northeast, the retreating distance, the 6 who followed and didn't come back, Robert Fenn's bootless tracks in the snow, Marget's walk, my missing toes. I took off my left boot and showed him the foot. I always do this during the briefing. It's the most effective thing I've got, not because it's dramatic, but because it's specific. It's not a story. It's not a theory. It's 2 absent toes on a real foot, and it means I am not guessing. I went out there, and this is what it cost me to come back. Elias listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he asked 3 questions. Do you know what happens to the people who don't come back? No. Do you know what's making the sound? No. Is it getting worse, more frequent, more aggressive, anything like that? I hesitated. This was a question I hadn't been asked before, and the honest answer was complicated. The frequency has been stable for as long as I've been tracking it, I said. But there's one thing that's different from Margit's era, the boot prints. Elias's eyes sharpened. Margit never mentioned finding boot prints. Neither did any of the older log entries. The first time I found one was my 4th winter, 2019. A single print, in snow, facing northeast, no trail, in or out. I found them 11 times since. Always single prints. Always northeast. Always NPS issue tread patterns. And here's the thing that bothers me most. The sizes vary. I've found size 8, size 11, size 13. If these are from the people who followed the screams, then the prints are appearing years, decades, after those people disappeared. You're saying the people who go in are still walking. I'm saying I find boot prints. I don't know what I'm saying beyond that. Elias sat with this for a while. The propane heater ticked. Outside, the sleet had turned to the season's first real snow. Big, heavy flakes that you could hear landing on the roof. The protocol is, don't go out, he said. The protocol is, don't go out. And it works. It has worked for me for 7 years. It worked for Margit for 12 years before that. As long as you don't follow, nothing happens. The screams maintain distance. They don't approach. They don't enter the stations. They stay out there. But they keep calling every winter. And new people keep coming to fill the seasonal positions. Yes. And you keep deciding when and how to tell each one. Yes. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said something that I have thought about nearly every day since. What if someone should answer? I told him no. I told him that was exactly the thinking that killed Robert Fenn and the others. I told him that the protocol exists because answering is what the screams are designed to provoke, and that every piece of evidence we have suggests that answering leads to disappearance and probable death. I was firm. I was clear. I believed, convincing. Elias nodded. He accepted the protocol verbally. He went to bed. And for 5 weeks, Elias's eyes sharpened. Margit never mentioned finding boot prints. Neither did any of the older log entries. The first time I found one was my fourth winter, 2019. A single print, in snow, facing northeast, no trail, in or out. I found them 11 times since. Always single prints. Always northeast. Always NPS issue tread patterns. And here's the thing that bothers me most. The sizes vary. I've found size 8, size 11, size 13. If these are from the people who followed the screams, then the prints are appearing years, decades, after those people disappeared. You're saying the people who go in are still walking. I'm saying I find boot prints. I don't know what I'm saying beyond that. Elias sat with this for a while. The propane heater ticked. Outside, the sleet had turned to the season's first real snow. Big, heavy flakes that you could hear landing on the roof. The protocol is, don't go out, he said. The protocol is, don't go out. And it works. It has worked for me for 7 years. It worked for Margit for 12 years before that. As long as you don't follow, nothing happens. The screams maintain distance. They don't approach. They don't enter the stations. They stay out there. But they keep calling every winter. And new people keep coming to fill the seasonal positions. Yes. And you keep deciding when and how to tell each one. Yes. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said something that I have thought about nearly every day since. What if someone should answer? I told him no. I told him that was exactly the thinking that killed Robert Fenn and the others. I told him that the protocol exists because answering is what the screams are designed to provoke, and that every piece of evidence we have suggests that answering leads to disappearance and probable death. I was firm. I was clear. I believed, convincing. Elias nodded. He accepted the protocol verbally. He went to bed, and for 5 weeks. I know. I found something, and I need you to come see it before I do anything else. What did you find? There are more boot prints. Not one. Dozens. They appeared overnight. There was fresh snow yesterday evening, and these are on top of it. They're all facing northeast. They're in a line, Karen. Not a trail. A line, single file, different sizes, different tread patterns, spaced about 3 feet apart. They start at the survey marker, and they go into the trees, and I followed them for about 200 yards. And they keep going, and they don't stop. Dale was standing next to me. He could hear Elias through the phone speaker. I watched Dale's face go tight. Elias, go back to the station. I'm at the station. I came back. I'm calling you from the station. But I need you to see this. We'll be there by 4. Stay inside. Karen, there's something else. I waited. The boot prints in the line. I measured 7 of them. 3 of the tread patterns match prints I've seen in your documentation. The ones you've been finding over the past 5 years. The size 11 from 2019, the size 8 from 2021. They're the same prints. But here's the thing. I also measured a size 10 with a distinctive wear pattern on the right heel, and I went back and checked the logbook, and the supply requisition records from 1981 include a boot order for a Robert Fenn, size 10. I didn't say anything. Robert Fenn has been dead for 42 years, Elias said. But his boot print is in fresh snow, in a line with the others, facing northeast, heading into the trees. Dale took the phone from me. I don't remember giving it to him. I don't remember the rest of the conversation. I remember Dale saying, "Stay inside," several more times. And I remember the ride back to Ridgeline on the snow machine, the two of us pushing the machines faster than we should have on a trail that was still soft from the last snowfall. The wind cutting into the gap between my goggles and my balaclava. And I remember thinking the same thought on a loop, over and over, like a scream at a fixed interval. The prints have never been in a line before. They've always been singles. Something has changed. Something is changing. We reached Ridgeline at 4:20 p.m. The sun was already below the mountains. Civil twilight. Elias was inside, at the table, with his field journal open. He had sketched each boot print he'd measured, with dimensions and tread patterns. And the sketches were meticulous, and the measurements were consistent, and there was no rational basis on which to doubt his data. "I need to see the line," I said. "It's getting dark," Dale said. "I know it's getting dark. I need to see this. Karen, it's getting dark." He was right. Of course he was right. The protocol. No one outside after dark. No exceptions. "First light tomorrow," I said. We agreed. We ate dinner. The screams came at 7:12 p.m. 19 repetitions, 11-second intervals from the northeast. We sat through them. We did not go outside. At first light, 9:40 a.m. in November at our latitude, the three of us went to the clearing. The boot prints were gone, not filled in by snow. There had been no snow overnight. The air had been still, the temperature steady at -22, the sky clear. The snow surface in the clearing was undisturbed, smooth, as if no one had walked there since the last snowfall, as if the line of prints that Elias had measured, sketched, and GPS tagged had never existed. Elias stood in the clearing and stared at the ground for a long time. Then he took out his GPS unit and walked to the coordinates he'd recorded the day before. He knelt. The snow was smooth and unbroken. He pressed his hand into it, as if checking that it was real. "They were here," he said. "I believe you," I said. And I did. I had found single boot prints that vanished. I had never found a line. But the principle was the same. Presence without persistence. Evidence that unbecomes. "Something is trying to show us where they went," Elias said. Or, "Something is trying to get us to follow." Those aren't mutually exclusive. He was right about that too. And I hated that he was right, because it meant the neat division I'd maintained for 7 years. The division between the thing is dangerous, stay away, and the thing is a mystery, investigate, was not as clean as I needed it to be. We went back to the station. We filed our morning radio check-in with Fairbanks. We said nothing about the boot prints. We never say anything to Fairbanks about the screams, about the prints, about any of it. Fairbanks knows the winter attrition rate is high. Fairbanks knows that seasonal rangers in this district sometimes don't finish their contracts. Fairbanks has access to the same missing persons data that I have. They have chosen, at an institutional level, to classify the problem as a staffing issue. They send us new people every September, and they don't ask what happened to the ones who left. This is the other moral question. Not just whether I have the right to decide who hears the truth, but whether the institution's refusal to acknowledge the truth makes me complicit in every disappearance that follows. Whether my protocol, my careful clinical boot-showing protocol, is actually protecting people, or just managing the institution's liability by keeping the knowledge contained within a population small enough to be dismissed as eccentric, if we ever tried to speak publicly. I don't know the answer. I've never known the answer. I manage what I can manage, and what I can manage is the 3 people who winter here, and the best tool I have is the protocol, and the protocol says, don't go out. But Elias was asking a different question. than any seasonal before him. He wasn't asking, "What is it?" the question of the curious. He wasn't asking, "How do I stay safe?" the question of the careful. He was asking, "What if the right thing to do is answer?" The question of someone who thinks the screams might be, on some level, a request. Through the rest of November, 3 more things happened that I need to tell you about. The first was small. On November 15th, Ilias was checking the weather station behind Ridgeline when he found a piece of fabric snagged on the anemometer pole. It was nylon, dark green, the kind of material used in NPS issue field jackets. It had not been there the evening before. The anemometer pole is 8 feet off the ground. There was no ladder, no drift piled against the pole, no way for a piece of fabric to reach that height without being placed there or carried by wind from a considerable distance. There was no wind that night. Elias bagged the fabric and logged it. I examined it. It was weathered but not rotted. I'd estimate months of exposure, not years. It smelled faintly of wood smoke. There was no name tag, no identifying marks, just a ragged patch of green nylon deposited 8 feet in the air on a calm night that had not been there the day before. The second thing happened on November 20th. I was alone at Ridgeline. Elias and Dale were running a day patrol to the southern stations, and I was doing my afternoon check of the recording equipment I keep running continuously from October through March. I review the overnight recordings every day, mostly out of a stubbornness I can't justify, hoping that this will be the night the microphones finally capture what my ears hear. On this recording, at 2:17 a.m., the microphones captured something, not the screams, not any sound I recognized. It was a low, sustained tone, sub-bass, right at the threshold of what the equipment can register, around 20 hertz. It lasted for 14 seconds. It was not present in the audible environment. I'd been awake at 2:17 a.m., as I often am, and I'd heard nothing. But the microphones picked it up, a tone below human hearing, at a frequency associated with infrasound, the range known to cause feelings of unease, nausea, and the sensation of being watched in human subjects. This was the first time in 7 years that my recording equipment had captured anything anomalous during the active season. I replayed the tone 18 times. On the 19th replay, I noticed something I'd missed. The tone was not steady. It pulsed, slightly, a barely perceptible amplitude modulation, cycling at roughly 1 pulse per 1.3 seconds. I slowed the recording down and measured the intervals. 1.3 seconds. 11 pulses in 14.3 seconds. The same interval structure as the screams, compressed into a frequency humans can't hear. Something was screaming below the range of human hearing, on a night when the audible screams hadn't come. As if the system had 2 channels, one for us to hear and one for the earth. I did not tell Elias about this. I did not tell Dale. I put the recording on a flash drive and locked the flash drive in the station's evidence box, which is a fireproof safe that Margaret installed and that only the senior Winter Ranger has the combination to. I told myself I was waiting for the right time. The truth is, I was afraid that if Elias heard the infrasound recording, it would confirm what he already believed, that the screams were communicative, that they were not a lure, but a signal, that something was trying to reach us, and that our protocol of not answering was not caution, but cruelty. The third thing was the one that broke the system. November 27th, Thanksgiving. We were all at Ridgeline. I'd made a turkey breast from the freezer stores, and Dale had baked cornbread, and Elias had contributed a pumpkin pie made from canned pumpkin and a crust recipe he said he'd learned from his grandmother. It was the most normal evening we'd had. We ate and talked about things that had nothing to do with the dark. Elias's sister's wedding in June, Dale's plans to rebuild the deck on his cabin in Esther, my ongoing effort to read the complete works of Ursula Le Guin during winter postings, which I'd been working on for 4 years and was only halfway through. The screams started at 6:58 p.m. We noted the time. We continued eating. This was routine. At 7:03 p.m., between the 4th and 5th repetitions, a new sound joined the sequence. It was a voice. Not the screaming voice. A different voice. Lower, hoarser, barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying with the same impossible clarity as the screams. Cutting through the log walls as if the station were made of paper. It said a single word. A name. It said Elias. The 3 of us froze. I mean, physiologically froze. I felt my voluntary muscle control stutter, the way it does when the brain encounters something so far outside expected input that the motor system pauses while the cortex tries to catch up. The screams resumed. The 5th repetition, the 6th, the 7th, and between each one, in the 11-second interval of silence, the whispered name, Elias, 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 Elias. Stood up from the table. He was not panicking. His face was white, but his eyes were steady. And what I saw in them was not fear. It was recognition, the expression of a person who has been expecting a phone call and has just heard it ring. Sit down, I said. It knows my name. Sit down, Elias. How does it know my name? It doesn't matter how. Sit down. It does matter. It's been out there for decades, and it's never said a name before. You told me that. You told me the screens don't respond, don't interact, don't change. It's changing. It's changing for me. That is exactly what it wants you to think, Dale said. Dale was standing now too, between Elias and the door. And I loved Dale in that moment, with a fierceness I didn't know I had left, because Dale understood what was happening, and Dale was already where he needed to be. The screams continued. The name continued. Elias, Elias, Elias. I'm not going outside, Elias said. I'm not stupid, but I need you to hear what I'm about to say, and I need you to actually consider it instead of retreating to the protocol. He sat back down. He put his hands flat on the table, the way you do when you're trying to show someone you're not a threat. 6 people have followed the screams and disappeared, maybe more. The protocol says, don't follow. The protocol has saved lives. I understand that. I respect that. But the protocol is not a plan. It's a holding pattern. It keeps us safe tonight, and the next night, and the next. But it doesn't address the fact that something is out there. That it's been there for at least 50 years, that it's getting more specific. Names, Karen, it's saying names, and that every September you bring in a new person and hope they'll follow the rules, and eventually one of them won't, and you'll file them under the same heading as the others and bring in someone new. The alternative is what? Dale said. Walk into the dark because it asked nicely. The alternative is a planned, daylight, prepared expedition along the bearing. Northeast, with GPS, with satellite communication, with a turnaround time agreed in advance, with partners, not a panicked midnight chase in my socks, a deliberate investigation by people who know what they're dealing with. We don't know what we're dealing with, I said. That's the entire point. Then find out. The screams stopped. The name stopped. The silence pressed in. and in the silence I could hear the propane heater and the wind and my own blood and nothing else, and the absence of the screams felt, as it always feels, like something holding its breath. "No," I said. Elias looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded once, and he cleared his plate, and he went to his bunk. I sat with Dale at the table for another hour. We didn't talk about it. We didn't need to. We both knew that something fundamental had shifted, not in the screams which had been shifting for weeks, but in the dynamic between the three of us. Elias had made a proposal. I had vetoed it. And the veto was not based on evidence or logic, but on the protocol, which was based on Margit's authority, which was based on the authority of the person before Margit, which traced back to Dave Okpeluk's note in the margin, "Don't go out." A chain of command built on fear and justified by the fact that, so far, fear had kept us alive. Elias wasn't afraid, and I didn't know if that made him brave or doomed. December came. The light shrank to 4 hours of grey twilight in the middle of the day, bracketed by 18 hours of dark so total that you could hold your hand in front of your face and see nothing. The cold deepened. The snow hardened into a surface you could walk on without snowshoes. The screams came on schedule, 12 nights in December, always after astronomical dark, always from the northeast. But they had changed. Not the screams themselves. Those remained identical. The same pitch profile, the same duration, the same machined repetition. What changed was the whispered name. It came every night now, in every interval between every scream. And it was not always Elias. On December 3rd, it said Dale. On December 7th, it said Karen. On December 12th, it said all three names in rotation: Elias, Dale, Karen, Elias, Dale, Karen, cycling through us like a roll call. I documented everything. So did Elias in his field journal. Dale did not document. Dale said he didn't need to write it down because he heard it every time he closed his eyes. The effect on Dale was the thing I hadn't anticipated. Dale, who had wintered here for 9 years. Dale, who I trusted like the floor. Dale, who had been my rock, my co-manager, the other half of the protocol. Dale started sleeping badly, then not sleeping, then sitting in the dark in the station's main room after Elias and I had gone to bed, staring at the door. I found him like that on December 15th, sitting in his chair, in the dark, facing the door, not moving. I turned on my headlamp and his eyes didn't react to the light. "Dale, I'm fine." "You're sitting in the dark, staring at the door." "I'm thinking." "About what?" "About whether the reason we've never found out what's at the end of the bearing is because everyone who follows doesn't come back to report." "That's not a new thought. That's the foundation of the protocol." "I know, but think about it differently. What if they don't come back because they don't want to? What if what's at the end of the bearing isn't death? What if it's something else, and the reason no one's ever returned to report is because reporting would mean leaving?" "Dale, that's the thing talking. You know that's the thing talking." He looked at me, and his eyes were wet, and he said, "My wife left me in 2019. My daughter won't return my calls. I've spent 9 winters in this cabin listening to a sound that wants me to come outside. 9 winters of saying no. Karen, at some point, the cost of staying is higher than the cost of going." I sat with him until he went to bed. I didn't sleep. I lay on my bunk and stared at the ceiling joists and understood, with a clarity that felt like freezing, that the protocol was failing. Not because the screams had gotten stronger, because we had gotten weaker. 3 people in a cabin, in the dark, for months. The protocol assumed that the thing outside was the only threat, but the thing inside, isolation, loneliness, the slow erosion of purpose, the weight of knowing you're guarding a line that you can never stop guarding and that no one outside this district will ever acknowledge exists. The thing inside was doing the softening work. I radioed Fairbanks the next morning and requested a 4th Winter Ranger. The request was denied. Budget, manning levels, the same institutional mathematics that had been performing the same calculation for 40 years. The Tanana winter posting is staffed at 3. 3 has been sufficient. If a seasonal separates early, the district absorbs the loss. The district absorbs the loss. That's the language. The district absorbs the loss. On December 22nd, the winter solstice, the shortest day and the longest night of the year, I made a decision. I would allow Elias his expedition, not because I believed it was safe, not because the screams had earned a response, but because I had looked at the trajectory we were on. Dale unraveling, Elias pressing, the screams calling our names. And I had calculated that the risk of doing nothing was now greater than the risk of doing something. That if I held the line for another 3 months, I would lose Dale. Maybe to the dark, maybe just to a breakdown that would remove him from duty, and then I would be alone with Elias, and Elias would go on his own, and I would find his boots by the stove. The expedition would be on my terms. Daylight, short duration, GPS tracked, satellite phone active, a firm turnaround, 2 miles along the bearing, then back. All 3 of us, no one alone, no exceptions. I briefed them on December 23rd. Dale was resistant. Elias was controlled but visibly electrified. We argued, we compromised, we set the parameters. December 26th. Start at first light, 10:15 a.m. 2 miles northeast along the bearing from Ridgeline Station. Turnaround no later than 12:30 p.m., which would give us an hour of light for the return, each of us carrying a full survival kit, GPS, radio, satellite phone, and a flare gun. Each of us committed to the turnaround time regardless of what we found or didn't find. I spent December 24th and 25th preparing. I checked equipment. I studied my maps. I reviewed 7 years of bearing data and plotted the most likely ground route. Through the clearing with the survey marker, then into the black spruce, trending northeast along a gentle upslope toward a ridge I'd never had reason to visit. I pulled satellite imagery of the area beyond the ridge. The imagery showed nothing. Dense boreal forest, undifferentiated, extending to the limit of the image. No clearings, no structures, no anomalies, just trees. On the night of December 25th, the screams came at 5:48 p.m., 26 repetitions, 11-second intervals, and in every interval, not a name this time, but a word I hadn't heard before. Closer. Just that. Whispered, in the same hoarse voice. Closer. 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 I almost called it off. I sat at the table with my hands flat, exactly the way Elias had sat weeks earlier, and I thought about calling it off. But I looked at Dale, who was sitting in his chair staring at the door again, and I looked at Elias, who was writing in his journal with a hand that wasn't shaking, and I understood that calling it off would not bring us back to where we'd been. The system was in motion. The only question left was whether it would move with us or without us. December 26th, 10:15 a.m. First light. 3 degrees below zero. Clear sky, no wind. The snow surface was crusted and hard, good for walking. We left ridgeline in single file, me in front, Elias in the middle, Dale behind. We moved northeast. The clearing came at the 12-minute mark. We passed the survey marker. Elias noted our coordinates. We entered the trees. Black spruce forest in winter is not like any other landscape I've been in. The trees are close together but narrow. You can move between them, but you can't see more than 30 or 40 feet in any direction. The canopy filters what little light there is into a gray-blue dimness that sits right on the threshold of visibility. Bright enough to see the ground, but dark enough that your peripheral vision starts generating shapes. The silence is absolute. Snow absorbs sound. The trees block wind. Your own breathing and the crunch of your boots are the only inputs. And after 20 minutes of walking, those sounds become so dominant that you start to hear patterns in them, rhythms, almost words. We walked. We followed the bearing. The GPS tracked our position. 18 minutes in, 1 mile. At 1 mile, Elias stopped. "Listen," he said. I stopped. Dale stopped. We listened. I heard nothing. My own breathing, the faint creak of a spruce under snow load, the blood in my ears. "I don't hear anything," Dale said. "Exactly," Elias said. "No birds, no squirrels, no wind in the canopy. The forest is completely quiet." He was right. December in interior Alaska is not bustling with wildlife, but there's always something. A raven, a boreal chickadee, the distant hammer of a woodpecker. Here, there was nothing. The biological silence was complete. I thought of the UAF acoustics researchers' observation about the recordings, a slight reduction in animal activity. But this wasn't slight. This was total, as if every living thing had drawn a circle around this area and decided not to cross it. We continued. The terrain began to rise gently, as the satellite imagery had suggested. The spruce grew thicker. The light dimmed further. At one point, I looked up and couldn't see the sky through the canopy. Just a dark lattice of branches, interlocking, filtering the daylight down to almost nothing. At 1.4 miles, I found the first boot print. It was in a sheltered hollow between 2 spruce trunks, where the snow had accumulated deeper and softer. A single print, right foot, facing northeast. I measured it. Size 13. A tread pattern I recognized. I documented this same pattern on a print I found at Cache Station in 2022. "That's one of them," Elias said, looking at the print, and then at me. "That's one of the people who went in." I nodded. I photographed the print. We continued. At 1.6 miles, we found more. Not singles now, clusters. Groups of 3 and 4 prints, overlapping, facing northeast, as if several people had stood in the same spot and then moved on together. Different sizes, different tread patterns. I counted at least 5 distinct boot patterns in one cluster. "They're grouping up," Dale said quietly. At 1.8 miles, the trees opened. I don't mean a clearing. I mean the trees ended. Abruptly. A wall of spruce on our side, and then nothing. An open space, maybe 200 feet across, perfectly circular, with no trees, no brush, no vegetation of any kind, just snow, flat, white, unbroken snow, ringed by the dark wall of the forest. I stopped at the tree line. Dale stopped beside me. Elias took 1 step into the clearing, and I grabbed his arm. "Turnaround is at 2 miles, I said. "We're at 1.8. We go to the center of the clearing, and that's it." Agreed. The 3 of us walked into the clearing. The light was different here, brighter, because there was no canopy, and the open sky above was the deep cobalt of an Arctic midday that was already thinking about evening. The snow surface in the clearing was perfect. Not a mark on it, no boot prints, no animal tracks, no wind texturing. It looked like a blank page. We reached the center. Elias took a GPS reading. Dale did a slow 360, scanning the tree line. I looked down. There was something under the snow. Not deep, an inch, maybe two, a discoloration, visible through the thin top layer, dark against the white. I knelt and brushed the surface snow away with my glove. It was a boot. An NPS issue hiking boot, right foot laced and tied, protruding from the packed snow beneath the surface layer, as if someone had been standing here when the snow covered them. The boot was weathered, the leather cracked, the sole worn smooth in places. Old, years old. I kept brushing. The boot was attached to a leg. The leg was wearing NPS field pants, faded green, the same style we wear now. The leg descended into the snow at an angle, not standing upright, not lying down, leaning, tilted, as if the person had been in mid-stride, walking northeast, and had stopped. Karen, Elias said. He was 10 feet from me, kneeling, brushing snow. He'd found another one. A left boot, smaller, with a different tread pattern, also attached to a leg, also tilted northeast. Dale found the third, then the fourth. Then we stopped counting, because the more snow we brushed away, the more we found, and the more we found, the clearer the pattern became. The clearing was full of them. Dozens, maybe more, all in mid-stride, all facing northeast, all buried under a thin skin of snow that had hidden them from above, from satellite imagery, from every form of observation that didn't involve standing in this exact spot and looking down. They were arranged in a line, single file, the same line of boot prints Elias had seen appear and disappear outside ridgeline. But these weren't prints. These were the boots themselves, still laced, still on feet, still attached to legs that descended into the packed snow at the uniform angle of people walking in the same direction, at the same pace, stopped simultaneously, like a paused recording. I counted 12 before I stood up and stepped back. "We need to go," I said. "Karen, M. Now. We need to go now." I was not panicking. I want to be clear about that. My voice was steady, and my hands were steady, and my decision was not emotional. It was 12:10 p.m. We had 20 minutes until the agreed turnaround, and we were 1.8 miles from the station, and the light was already dimming, and I had just found what appeared to be the preserved remains of at least 12 people buried in a clearing that shouldn't exist in an area that no satellite image has ever shown to be anything but unbroken. Forest. And there was something else, something I didn't mention to Elias or Dale because I wasn't sure, and because I'm still not sure, and because being sure would change everything. The legs were warm. When I'd brushed the snow away from the first boot, my glove had pressed against the pant leg above it, and through the insulation of my glove, I'd felt warmth. Not body heat, not the 37 degrees Celsius of a living person, but not ambient temperature either, not -3, something in between. The dead, the long dead, the decades dead buried in permafrost, they should be frozen solid. These weren't. These were warm the way a thing is warm when something is still happening inside it. We left the clearing. We walked south-southwest, back along our own tracks. We did not speak. The forest was silent. The light was fading. At 12:48 p.m., We emerged from the trees into the open ground north of Ridgeline Station, and I could see the cabin and the radio antenna and the snow machines parked under the tarp, and I felt something that I can only describe as the opposite of relief, a feeling of having returned to safety that was contaminated by the knowledge that safety was a smaller thing than I had believed. We entered the station. I locked the door. Dale sat in his chair. Elias went to the table and opened his field journal and began writing. I made the satellite phone call at 1:15 p.m., not to Fairbanks, to Margit Talvella, retired, living in Anchorage, the only other person alive who had wintered this district long enough to have standing. She answered on the third ring. Karen, Margit, we went northeast. Silence. Then, how far? 1.8 miles. There's a clearing, a circular clearing that doesn't show on any imagery. The people who followed the screams are there. Their bodies are there. At least 12. They're in mid-stride, buried in shallow snow, facing northeast. Margit, they're warm. Silence again. Longer this time. Did you touch them? My glove brushed one. That's how I felt the warmth. Did you disturb them? Move them? Dig any of them out? No, we brushed surface snow. We didn't excavate. Good. Karen, listen to me. Don't go back. I need to understand what we found. You found the line. I found the line in 2009. 7 years before you started. I didn't tell you because you didn't need to know. The room shifted, not physically, perceptually. The dimensions of the lie I'd been managing for 7 years suddenly acquired a new dimension. Margit had told me everything. Margit had shown me the whole picture. Margit had handed me the protocol and the data and the history and the authority to manage it. Margit had lied to me the same way I'd lied to Elias. You knew about the clearing, I said. I knew about the clearing. You knew about the bodies. I knew about the bodies. Why didn't you tell me? Because when I found the clearing, I went back the next day with a shovel and I dug one of them up. I excavated the full body. And the body was intact, not decomposed, not frozen, intact, warm, with a pulse. I didn't speak. A pulse, Karen. 44 beats per minute. Regular, strong, eyes closed, not breathing, but with a pulse. And the face, she stopped. I heard her breathing. The face was moving, very slightly. The jaw, the lips, moving the way a person's face moves when they're dreaming. What did you do? I filled the hole back in. I went back to the station. I never told anyone. I did what Dave did and what the person before Dave did. I wrote, "Don't go out," in the margin, and I trained the next ranger, and I left. Margit, they're alive. I don't know what they are, but they're not dead in any way I understand, and they're not suffering in any way I could see, and the ones who followed the screams, the ones we say we lost, they're standing in a clearing, in a line, facing northeast, warm, with pulses, dreaming, and they've been doing it for at least 40 years, and I do not know what happens at the end of the line, and I do not want to know. What's at the end of the line? I didn't follow it. The line continues into the trees on the northeast side of the clearing. I didn't go into the trees. Karen, don't go into the trees. I sat with the phone against my ear, and the room around me, and the dying light outside, and the knowledge that for all these years, the thing I thought I was protecting people from, death, might not be what was waiting. That the screams might not be a lure to kill but a call to join. That Robert Fenn, barefoot in the snow in 1981, might not have been walking to his death, but to something else. Something that looked like death from the outside and felt like dreaming from the inside, and that had no word in any language I speak. And that, the protocol I'd built my winters around, that I'd shown my missing toes for, that I'd used to control the flow of information to every person who'd trusted me in this district, was not wrong exactly, but incomplete. It was a protocol for avoiding death. I no longer knew if death was what we were avoiding. Elias was watching me. He'd stopped writing. He'd heard my half of the conversation. "What did she say?" he asked. I looked at him. 26 years old. Smart, brave, lonely in the way that people who request winter Alaska postings are lonely, not from lack of connection, but from an excess of something they can't name, a frequency they can't tune to, a signal they've been hearing all their life that no one else seems to pick up. I looked at Dale, 53, 9 winters, a wife who left, a daughter who won't call, sitting in his chair, staring at the door, waiting for something he was almost ready to walk toward. And I looked at myself, 41, 11 years, 2 missing toes, a protocol that had kept me alive and kept me lying in equal measure. A locked evidence box containing a recording of something screaming below the range of human hearing, in the voice of the earth itself, in the interval pattern of the thing that calls our names. She said, "Don't go back." I told Elias, "But you're going to go back." "No, I'm not." He stared at me. "I'm not going back," I said. "And neither are you. And neither is Dale. What's in that clearing has been there for 40 years. It can wait. Wait for what? For someone smarter than us. For better equipment. For an approach that doesn't involve 3 people with a flare gun and a prayer. For spring, when there's 20 hours of light and we can bring a full team. For Fairbanks to actually acknowledge what's happening in this district and send resources. For any of the 100 things that should come before 3 exhausted winter rangers making the most consequential discovery in this district's history and trying to handle it alone in December. Elias wanted to argue. I could see it forming behind his eyes, but he looked at Dale, and he saw what I saw. A man at the edge of his capacity, a man for whom one more night of screams might be the night he doesn't come back from. And whatever Elias was about to say, he swallowed it. "Okay," he said. Spring. We got through January. We got through February, which is always the worst, the coldest, the darkest, the most compressed, by keeping to the protocol, by checking in on the radio, by talking to each other about things that weren't the clearing, by doing the small, mundane, essential work of maintaining 6 stations across 4,000 square miles of wilderness in the hardest conditions the lower latitudes can produce. The screams continued, the names continued, but we didn't hear closer again. Whatever had been escalating seemed to plateau. The screams maintained their distance. They maintained their pattern. They called our names in the dark, and we sat inside, and we did not go out. Dale made it. That's the thing I want to say. Dale made it through the winter. He slept badly, and he stared at the door, and some nights I heard him whispering back, whispering his own name into the dark, answering the thing that called it, as if the acknowledgement alone was enough to keep the need from building into action. But he stayed inside. He followed the protocol. He made it to April, when the light came back, and the screams thinned to 3 nights that month, and then 2, and then none. Elias made it too. He kept his journal. He refined his data. He drafted a proposal for the spring expedition. Detailed, methodical, professional. Equipment lists, communication protocols, turnaround criteria, escalation procedures, risk assessments. It was the kind of document you'd submit to a research ethics board. And I read it and I thought, this is what should have been done 30 years ago. This is what should have been done instead of don't go out. I submitted Elias's proposal to Fairbanks on April 15th, attached to my own report documenting the scream phenomenon, the boot prints, the clearing, and the bodies. I included 7 years of data. I included the infrasound recording. I included Elias's sketches and GPS logs, and the photograph of the clearing that showed smooth, unbroken snow because the bodies don't photograph any more than the screams record. But that also showed a perfectly circular gap in the forest that no surveyor has ever mapped, and no satellite has ever flagged. Fairbanks received the report. Fairbanks acknowledged the report. And Fairbanks denied the spring expedition on the grounds that the described phenomena were inconsistent with documented natural hazards in the district, and that the proposed investigation falls outside the scope of National Park Service field operations. The district absorbs the loss. Elias resigned on April 28th, not because he was giving up, because he was going around. He told me he was going to UAF to get credentials, get funding, get an institutional framework that Fairbanks couldn't dismiss. He said he'd be back. He said it would take time, but he'd be back with the resources to do this properly. I believed him. I still believe him. Dale did not come back for a 10th winter. He took a transfer to a district in New Mexico. Desert, warmth, no dark season. No screams. I talk to him on the phone once a month. He's doing better. He doesn't stare at doors anymore. He told me once, in the careful tone of a man choosing his words precisely, that the thing he misses most about the Tanana winter posting is not the work, or the landscape, or even the people. It's the screams. He misses the screams. He misses being called. I'm still here. It's October now, and I'm writing this from Ridgeline Station, and I have 2 new seasonal rangers, Tomoko and Brendan, who arrived in September and who are currently in their 2nd week of orientation, and who have not yet heard the screams, and who I have not yet briefed, and who trust me to tell them the truth when the time comes. The time will come, the screams will start, and I will sit them down, and I will show them my foot, and I will tell them the protocol, don't go out. But this year, for the first time, I'm also going to tell them what's in the clearing. I'm going to tell them about the bodies that aren't dead, and the line that goes into the trees, and the legs that are warm, and the faces that dream. I'm going to tell them that the protocol protects them from something that might not be danger, that I've been telling people not to go out for 7 years, and I have 2 missing toes to prove it was good advice. But I also have 12 warm bodies in a clearing that I can't explain, and a retired ranger in Anchorage who dug one up and found a pulse and never told me until I found them myself. I'm going to let them make a decision with full information for the first time in this district's history. No staged revelation, no managed timeline, no careful calibration of when someone is ready. And I'm going to be honest about the thing that scares me most. Not the screams, not the clearing, not the warm dead who dream in the snow. What scares me most is that I have spent 7 years deciding what other people are allowed to know, and I am not certain that a single one of those decisions was mine to make. The screams will come again. They always come. They'll call from the northeast in a voice that sounds like terror and might be invitation. And my new rangers will hear them, and their hands will tighten, and their eyes will go to the door, and they'll feel the pull, the profound physical certainty that someone needs them. and I will not tell them it's a fox. I will tell them what I know. I will tell them what I don't know. And I will tell them that the protocol says, don't go out, and that the protocol has kept everyone who followed it alive, and that the people who didn't follow it are standing in the snow with their eyes closed and their hearts beating, dreaming of something I cannot see, in a line that leads into the trees, heading northeast toward whatever is waiting at the end, and then I will let them choose. That's the thing I owe them that no one ever gave me. The choice. Not the managed choice, not the choice with a thumb on the scale, not the choice that arrives after weeks of deliberate misdirection have already shaped which way you'll lean. The real one. All the information, all at once, on the first night. I think about Robert Fenn sometimes, walking barefoot into the snow. I think about his boots by the stove, still warm, and the steady tracks heading northeast, and the 42 years he's been standing in that clearing with his eyes closed and his heart beating. I think about whether he's in pain. I think about what he's dreaming. I think about the possibility that he found something we're too afraid to look for, and that the screams are not a predator's call, but a signal from people who went ahead and want us to follow. I don't know if that's true, but I don't know that it isn't, and the difference between those two positions is not nothing. The difference between those two positions is the space in which every person in this district deserves to make their own decision. The sun is going down. It's 5:30 p.m. The dark comes fast now. Tomoko is reading by the stove. Brendan is at the radio, finishing the evening check-in. They're good people. Competent, steady, exactly the kind of rangers you want in a place like this. They trust me. I can hear something starting far away, to the northeast. A sound rising. The first one of the season. I'm going to go sit at the table and wait for them to hear it. And when the second one comes, identical, 11 seconds later, impossible, and their faces change, and they look at me for an explanation, I'm going to take a breath and tell them the truth. All of it. And whatever they decide, whatever any of us decide, tonight and every night after, will at least have been decided freely, with open eyes, by people who were trusted with what they were facing. That's not a protocol. It's barely even a plan, but it's the first honest thing this district has done in 50 years, and I think we're owed that. The second scream is coming. I can feel it building. The way you feel a wave building before it crests, not in your ears, but in your chest, in your teeth, in the part of you that is older than language and knows the sound of something calling from a very long way off, in a direction you have never gone, toward a place you have always known was there. 11 seconds. Here it comes.